There is no question that media is exploited, is manipulated. There's no question that the BBC is biased, um, biased against the prevailing mood to describe Hamas as a terrorist organization, which it is, but biased equally against the against the Palestinians. So, for example, there's a clip going round where a BBC newscaster talks about 12 people, including 2 children, who have died in Gaza, 12 people, including 2 children, who were killed in Israel. The language which is being used is biased, no question. Now, beyond that, what else is happening? The Hamas is clearly exploiting this uh, inability to report something in an objective way. We cannot do that. We are always going to have a bias, and identifying that bias is what's so important. This is why it's important to protect and encourage organizations like GB News, even Talk TV, Fox, a variety of television outlets with perhaps skewed views. Because if you're looking at the news from different sources, then maybe you can get a more rounded view, and it takes time for organizations like the BBC, who want to stamp an imprimatur of truth on things. That is not available. It's not actually for the media presenters to be identifying what is truth and what is not. We want the information, and we want it as quickly as possible. Therefore, we should start looking at information sources from other media outlets from other countries, if we can. And the reports of babies murdered, of civilians burnt alive, of grandmothers executed, dragged away as hostages, of women and children raped, murdered, mutilated, their bodies paraded through the streets. This is simply appalling. This is the mark of a terrorist organization. And now we see bodies piled up outside a hospital in Gaza. And we are told that the reason that there are no burials is because the Palestinians in Gaza are afraid of digging graves because they might be blown up and accused of hiding rockets. Well, that's also partly true. And but at the same time, it's very difficult to avoid the impression that this could also be a staged event. And where best to hide than in a hospital? I think the Gazan Palestinians are in an appalling situation. They feel threatened by Israel. They feel threatened by their own government. Their own government, Gaza, is sitting on an aquifer. They could be producing water, but instead they're relying on water shipped in from Israel. They're relying on electricity shipped in from Israel. They have destroyed farms which were working perfectly well and managed by Israeli farmers. They're given back to the Palestinians, and under the Hamas government, they have fallen into disrepair. They are dependent on food supplies from Israel. And for 18 years, Hamas has neglected its duty, intent, obsessed with its rhetoric and with its jihadi regime. Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. And there's a lot of people, Owen Jones and people saying, this is an open-air prison. Varoufakis says it. They're right, but it's an open-air prison controlled by Hamas. as much as it is controlled by Israel. Israel has allowed this to happen, which I think is reprehensible. But Hamas has engineered it. Hamas is the organization which rejected the two-state solution. I think it is important that Hamas is removed from the play, but in the process, I think it's also important that Israel remembers history, that Israel remembers that in the Second World War, Britain firebombed Dresden, killing 25,000 innocent civilians, destroying the city. That after 9/11, we attacked Iraq, causing 100,000 civilians deaths, causing the deaths of 100,000 civilians. Our hands are not clean, but we learn from the past and we make sure that is not repeated today. The same thing is true in the war in Russia and Ukraine. We learn from the past. We don't turn to the past and we say, oh yes, you did this, so we can do it. I would be appalled if Netanyahu went ahead and razed Gaza to the ground. This would be a war crime. This would remove any possibility of regarding the Israeli government as anything other than savage. I think the response has already been savage. I think there's a way out, and I think there may well be options for tracking down Hamas which don't involve the collective punishment of the entire Gaza Strip. But it's a difficult call. The United Nations has condemned Israel on a number of occasions, more than any other country in the world. And the principles of international law are cited on many occasions at Israel. And Israel has huge responsibility to care for innocent life, to preserve peace. But at the same time, it is at the cutting edge of this war. And that's a war that's not only about militant and aggressive interpretations of Islam. It's also a war which is staged by, it's a proxy war staged by Putin and Russia. We see it also in Syria, and it might even be possible in Libya, but it's certainly a war which is playing out in Africa as well. And we have to tread very carefully, because this could blow out of all proportion. And it is stupidity itself which thinks that we need a world war. We really don't need a world war. What we need is a peaceful solution and a 21st century approach to resolving conflict. At the moment, we're locked in a 19th century approach to resolving conflict with 21st century weapons. That is very, very worrying. And we have to grow up. We have to mature. And we have to, rather than having an international community that wags its fingers and imposes peacekeeping forces on nations that are struggling, we need an international community which actively engages with such nations on both sides and is actively involved in preventing conflict. And so far we haven't got to that point. So far we're at the point where the international forces are involved in sanctions, providing weapons, and a lot of rhetoric. As for Zelensky, I would repeat, as long as Zelensky requires support, military support, he should get it. He is the offended party, he is the invaded country. The same thing, the same principle is true about Israel. Israel is the invaded country. But I think it crosses the line when either Ukraine attacks on Russian soil or Israel attacks on Palestinian soil. That is the point where I think there's a red line crossed. And Israel crossed that red line very quickly. Now, is Israel really at war? In one sense it isn't, because Israel is not at war with another country, where Israel is at war with a territory which is loosely linked to the Palestinian Authority. I don't think Israel has declared war on Palestine. Israel has declared war on Gaza. And that is different. And I think we need international support as fast as possible. We also need, if Israel wants Gazans to leave the north of Gaza, then I think the international community should be ready with ships and with facilities for people to leave by the coast. There's a long coast, and it should be possible to use that. And if people cannot leave into Egypt, Israel must facilitate the possibility of them leaving into Israel, and of large, significant Palestinian refugee camps in the state of Israel itself, if it wishes to pursue that. But that means it needs to throw its gates open, and it needs to start processing refugees as fast as possible. That is a humanitarian solution.